The clatter of a fork on a porcelain plate was the only sound Amelia Rosewood heard. A sound that sliced through the restaurant's ambient chatter and straight into her heart. Her hands, rough from cleaning chemicals and hot water, trembled slightly as she clutched the heavy serving tray. Standing just feet away was the man she'd once called her husband, Mark Smith, draped in a Tom Ford suit she'd helped him pick out in a different lifetime. He was laughing with his new fiancée, a woman wearing a diamond the size of a robin's egg. And then he saw her. His smile didn't fade. It sharpened into a weapon. "Well, well," he said, his voice loud enough for the whole table to hear. "Look what we have here. Still paying for my dinner, I see." The restaurant Aurelia was a cruel joke, a monument to a life that was no longer hers. Amelia remembered when she and Mark had been the ones sitting at table 7, the coveted corner booth with the velvet seats and the perfect view of the city lights. She had designed the floral arrangements for their opening night, a favor to the owner, a friend from their shared world of gallery openings and charity galas. Now she was just part of the hired help, invisible in a starched black uniform, her name tag reading Amy, because Amelia was deemed too formal by the floor manager. Mark Smith hadn't just left her. He had systematically erased her. He was a master of narratives, a rising star in the world of corporate acquisitions, and his greatest acquisition had been her life. They had met young. She was a promising painter, her canvases filled with raw emotional landscapes that critics were beginning to notice. He was an ambitious analyst with a charming smile and a hunger for success. He'd promised her the world, a studio with perfect northern light, a life where she could create without worry. And for a while it was true. She'd put her brushes down to help him build his hosting dinners, networking, polishing his image until it gleamed. The divorce was a masterclass in brutality. The lawyer Mark hired a shark named Stephen Pierce had used her career hiatus against her. She was painted as a freeloader, a dependent wife with no claim to the empire she'd helped build from the ground up. The prenuptial agreement she'd signed in a haze of love and trust was wielded like a guillotine. She walked away with a pittance, her name tarnished and her spirit in tatters. She lost the house, the friends, the life. She was 38 years old, and she had to start over from nothing. Now at 40, nothing was a cramped one-bedroom apartment above a noisy laundromat in a less than glamorous part of the city, and a job that paid just enough to cover rent and ramen. The smell of bleach and regret clung to her clothes. Mark's words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. His fiancée, a woman named Tiffany, giggled a tinkling sound that grated on Amelia's nerves. "Mark, be nice," Tiffany purred, though there was no sincerity in her voice. "I am being nice," he said, his eyes still locked on Amelia. He pulled out his wallet, a sleek black leather piece by Bottega Veneta. He extracted a crisp $100 bill and held it out. Not to the hostess, not for the bill, but directly to Amelia. "Here," he said, his voice dripping with condescending pity. "For your excellent service. Maybe you can finally buy a decent pair of shoes. Those look like they're about to fall apart." Amelia's eyes darted down to her sensible black non-slip work shoes. They were indeed worn, the leather cracked at the seams. It was a petty, targeted cruelty designed to humiliate her in the most public way possible. The other diners at his table, his business associates, shifted uncomfortably, unsure where to look. Every cell in her body screamed at her to throw the tray of dirty dishes at his perfectly coiffed head. To scream about the nights she stayed up editing his proposals, the inheritance she'd sunk into his first business venture, the dreams she'd sacrificed on the altar of his ambition. But she didn't. Years of being Mrs. Mark Smith had taught her one thing: composure was a shield. Breaking down was what he wanted. It would confirm the narrative he'd spun for everyone that she was unstable, emotional, unworthy. With a deep breath that felt like swallowing broken glass, Amelia forced a polite, empty smile onto her face. It was a mask she had perfected. "Thank you, sir," she said, her voice miraculously steady. She took the bill, her fingers brushing his for a fraction of a second. His skin felt cold, alien. "The restaurant has a policy against direct tipping. I will add this to the collective staff fund. Will there be anything else? Her professionalism was a slap in the face he hadn't expected. A flicker of annoyance crossed his features before he masked it with a smirk. No, Amy, that will be all. He had emphasized her new name one final twist of the knife. Amelia nodded curtly and turned, walking back towards the kitchen on legs that felt like jelly. She didn't look back. She could feel his eyes on her, feel the weight of his judgment and the pitying glances from the other tables. The swinging doors of the kitchen closed behind her, and the cacophony of clattering pans and shouting chefs enveloped her. She leaned against the cool stainless steel wall, the $100 bill crinkling in her clenched fist. She didn't cry. The tears had run dry years ago. Instead, a cold, hard resolve began to form in the pit of her stomach. He thought this was her end. He thought he had won. She would spend every last ounce of her being proving him wrong. The apartment was her sanctuary and her prison. The living room doubled as her studio, the worn wooden floor perpetually splattered with acrylics in shades of cobalt blue, burnt sienna, and cadmium yellow. A large unfinished canvas sat on a cheap easel by the window, its blankness a constant accusation. For the first year after the divorce, she couldn't even look at a paintbrush without feeling a wave of nausea. Mark had once called her art a cute hobby, a quaint little pastime for a wife. His words had been poison, seeping into her passion until it withered. Her only friend who had survived the social purge of the divorce was Sarah, a fellow waitress at Aurelia. Sarah was a fiery, no-nonsense nursing student who saw the world in black and white. "You should have spit in his risotto," Sarah said that night, slamming a mug of cheap tea onto Amelia's small, wobbly kitchen table. Amelia managed a weak smile, finally unclenching her fist. She smoothed the $100 bill on the table. It looked obscene next to her chipped mug and the stack of overdue bills. "And get fired, I need this job, Sarah. You need your soul back more." Sarah countered, her expression softening. She gestured toward the easel. "Have you painted?" Amelia shook her head. "I'm too tired. After a 10-hour shift, my hands hurt, my feet are swollen. There's just nothing left." "That's what he wants, Amy," Sarah said, her voice firm. "For there to be nothing left. Don't let him win. That bastard took everything from you. Don't let him have that too." Sarah's words echoed in Amelia's mind long after she left. She stared at the $100 bill. It was blood money, a token of her humiliation. She could use it to pay her electric bill. It would be the sensible thing to do. But as she looked from the bill to the blank canvas, a different idea began to spark. An idea fueled by rage and a desperate need for catharsis. The next morning, instead of depositing the money, she walked into an art supply store, a place she hadn't set foot in for years. The familiar smell of linseed oil and turpentine was like a forgotten memory. She spent the entire $100, every last cent, on supplies. Not just the basics, but the good stuff. She bought a tube of genuine ultramarine blue she hadn't used since art school, thick brushes, and a set of palette knives. It was a reckless, irresponsible act of defiance. It was the most alive she had felt in 2 years. That night she didn't sleep. Fueled by coffee and simmering anger, she attacked the canvas. She didn't sketch or plan. She let her emotions guide her hand. She poured all the humiliation, the heartbreak, and the quiet, desperate loneliness of the past few years onto the canvas. She used the palette knives to slash on thick layers of paint, creating a texture that was rough and painful to the touch. She created a stormy, abstract seascape under a bruised purple sky. It was dark, chaotic, but in the very center, a single, impossibly bright streak of white light broke through the clouds, hitting a cresting wave. It was a painting of despair, but also of a tiny, stubborn flicker of hope. She worked for 3 days straight, calling in sick to the restaurant. She forgot to eat. She forgot to sleep. She painted until her fingers were raw and her body ached, but her spirit felt lighter. When she was finally finished, she stepped back, exhausted and trembling. The painting was titled Aurelia. She had no idea what to do with it. Her old gallery contacts were long dead friends of Mark, who had ghosted her after the divorce. The art world, she knew, was a closed circle. and she was on the outside. On a whim, driven by something she couldn't explain, she looked up local art fairs. There was one that weekend, the Greenwich Village Outdoor Art Show. It was a public non-juried event. Anyone could rent a small space for $50 and display their work. It felt foolish, humiliating in a different way, setting up her masterpiece next to amateur watercolors of cats and caricature artists. But the impulse was too strong to ignore. She borrowed Sarah's beat-up station wagon, carefully wrapped the still slightly tacky painting in a blanket, and drove downtown before dawn on a chilly Saturday morning, feeling like a complete and utter fool. The art fair was a chaotic symphony of human creativity and commerce. Tourists ambled by clutching hot dogs while serious-looking art students critiqued everything with knowing smirks. Amelia felt exposed, her single deeply personal painting propped up on her rickety easel. It was so different from the cheerful landscapes and pop art portraits surrounding it. It was dark, brooding, and intensely emotional. Most people walked right past it without a second glance. By late afternoon, a cold drizzle had started, and Amelia was ready to pack it all in. Her brief surge of defiant hope was dissolving into the damp gray pavement. This was a mistake. She was a waitress with delusions of grandeur. Mark was right. Her art was just a hobby and not a very profitable one. As she began to untie the tarp she'd brought to protect the painting, a man stopped in front of her display. He was tall and dressed in a way that spoke of quiet, effortless wealth. A simple gray cashmere sweater over a crisp white shirt, tailored dark trousers, and well-worn leather shoes that probably cost more than her rent. He wasn't handsome in a conventional movie star way. His face was all sharp angles and intelligent, discerning eyes. There were faint silver threads at his temples, suggesting he was in his late 40s or early 50s. He held a large black umbrella, which he angled slightly to shield her painting from the rain. He didn't speak for a long time. He just looked. His gaze was intense, analytical, moving over every inch of the canvas. He leaned in to examine the thick texture of the paint, the way she had carved into it with the palette knife. Amelia stood frozen, her heart thumping against her ribs. She was used to being invisible. This man's focused attention was unnerving. Finally he spoke, his voice a low, pleasant baritone. "The light," he said, more to himself than to her. "It's not just painted on. It feels like it's being ripped out from underneath the darkness. It's violent and yet hopeful." Amelia was so stunned she could barely find her voice. "Thank you," she stammered. He turned his gaze to her then, and his eyes, a startling shade of hazel, held a surprising warmth. "Did you paint this?" "Yes." "What's it called?" "Aurelia." She said the name, leaving a bitter taste in her mouth. He raised an eyebrow, a flicker of curiosity in his expression, but he didn't press. "It's magnificent. There's a raw power to it, a story. It reminds me of early Anselm Kiefer, but with more vulnerability." Amelia's mind reeled. Anselm Kiefer, one of the greatest living artists. This man wasn't just a casual browser. He knew art. "How much are you asking for it?" He asked, his tone direct and professional. Amelia hadn't even considered a price. The act of creation had been the point. She plucked a number out of thin air that sounded impossibly high to her, a number that would cover her rent for 3 months. $1,500, she said, her voice barely a whisper, bracing herself for him to laugh and walk away. The man didn't even blink. He reached into the inside pocket of his impeccably tailored jacket and pulled out a checkbook and a pen. "A bargain," he said simply. "Who do I make it out to?" "Amelia Rosewood." She said her full real name. It felt good to say it. He wrote the check, tore it out, and handed it to her. Her eyes widened as she saw the name printed in the top left corner, Julian Croft. Julian Croft. The name hit her like a physical blow. It wasn't just a name. It was a legend. Julian Croft was one of the most enigmatic and influential figures in the modern world. A tech billionaire who had made his fortune in his 20s and then promptly vanished from the public eye. He was a notorious recluse known for two things: his groundbreaking work in AI and his colossal world-class private art collection. He never attended galas, never gave interviews. His photograph hadn't been published in over a decade. And he was standing in the rain in a public park buying her painting. I don't know what to say," she stammered, staring at the check. "You don't have to say anything," he said with a small wry smile. "Your work has already said enough. My assistant will be by in an hour to arrange for proper transport. It would be a crime to let it get damaged in the rain." He handed her a simple, elegant business card. "This is my curator's number. I'd be very interested in seeing any other work you have, or any future work you create." And with that he gave a slight nod, turned, and disappeared into the crowd, his black umbrella swallowed by the gray afternoon. Amelia stood there in the drizzling rain, clutching a check for wound $500 and a business card that felt like a key to another universe. The cold, the dampness, the humiliation of the past 2 years, it all seemed to fade away. For the first time in a very long time, the world felt full of color again. The next week was a surreal blur. Julian Croft's curator, a sophisticated woman named Elena, did indeed call. She was professional and courteous, expressing Mr. Croft's profound admiration for Aurelia and formally extending an invitation for Amelia to visit his private gallery. The gallery wasn't in a museum or a chic downtown loft. It was a restored pre-war warehouse in a quiet industrial part of Brooklyn with no sign on the door. Inside, the space was breathtaking. Soaring ceilings, polished concrete floors, and walls adorned with masterpieces Amelia had only ever seen in art history textbooks. There was a Rothko humming with color, a de Kooning pulsating with frantic energy, and a Richter that blurred the line between photography and painting. And there on a prominent wall all its own was Aurelia. It didn't look out of place. It held its own, its raw emotion a stark and powerful contrast to the more cerebral works around it. Julian was there to greet her. Dressed casually in jeans and a dark t-shirt, he looked less like a mythical billionaire and more like a university professor. "It belongs here," he said, gesturing to her painting. "It speaks the same language." Over the next few months, this became their routine. Julian commissioned another painting from her and then another. He gave her no direction, only a generous stipend that allowed her to quit her job at Aurelia and paint full-time. He wanted to see what she would create unburdened by financial stress. Their meetings were always at the gallery. They would talk for hours not just about art but about everything. Music, philosophy, the strange melancholy of autumn in the city. Amelia learned about his past. He had also been through a bitter public split. His ex-wife, a tech mogul herself, had tried to claim his company, leading to a brutal legal battle that played out in the headlines. The experience had made him intensely private, wary of people's motives. "Most people don't see me," he confessed one afternoon, staring at a Giacometti sculpture. "They see a walking, talking bank vault. They project their own desires and ambitions onto me. It's lonely." Amelia understood that kind of loneliness. "I know what it's like to be seen as an accessory," she admitted, her voice quiet. "To have your identity completely absorbed by someone else's." It was this shared wound that forged the foundation of their bond. He wasn't interested in the broken, divorced waitress. He was captivated by Amelia Rosewood, the artist. He saw the strength in her survival, the beauty in her scars. He listened, truly listened when she spoke of her faded dreams, and he gently encouraged her to dream them again. He never once offered pity, only respect. He celebrated her small victories. When she finished a new piece, Echoes of a Fall, a triptych that explored the slow decay of her marriage, he sat before it for a full hour in silence before simply saying, "It's devastatingly honest and brilliant." One evening he invited her to dinner, not at a fancy restaurant, but at his home, a stunning minimalist penthouse overlooking Central Park. He cooked for her himself a simple but delicious pasta dish. It was there, surrounded by his personal art collection and the glittering expanse of the city, that the professional boundary between them gracefully dissolved. He told her about the first time he saw her painting at the art fair. "It was like reading a page from your diary," he said, his hazel eyes sincere. "I felt like I knew you before we ever spoke. I saw the pain, the anger, but most of all, I saw the fight. I saw the person who painted that streak of light in the middle of the storm, and I knew I had to meet her. It was a slow burn, a relationship built not on grand romantic gestures, but on shared understanding, intellectual respect, and a deep, quiet affection. He never tried to fix her or save her. He simply gave her the space and the means to save herself." For Amelia, it was a revelation. Mark's love had been about possession and control. Julian's love was about liberation. He wasn't a prince rescuing a damsel. He was a fellow survivor who recognized the queen hidden beneath the ashes. Her art flourished. The darkness in her work began to recede, replaced by vibrant colors and bold, confident strokes. She was creating the best work of her life, and her name was beginning to be whispered in the most exclusive circles of the art world, all thanks to the quiet patronage of its most reclusive king. Life was good. It was calm. But the calm was just the air before the storm. The art world is a small, incestuous ecosystem. News of a major new talent, especially one backed by the legendary Julian Croft, travels fast. Art blogger Jessica Finch was the first to break the story. Her piece titled "The Rosewood Revelation Croft's New Protege" went viral. It featured stunning photographs of Amelia's new works and hailed her as the most exciting new voice in contemporary abstract art. The article mentioned her past, framing it as a tragic backstory she had overcome, though it didn't name Mark directly, referring to him only as a high-powered executive ex-husband. The article was the proudest moment of Amelia's professional life. She and Julian celebrated with a bottle of champagne on her tiny apartment balcony, the city lights twinkling below them. For the first time, she felt truly free of her past. But the past wasn't finished with her. Mark Smith saw the article. He saw the photos of Amelia looking radiant and confident. He saw her powerful, celebrated paintings. He read the glowing quotes from critics. And he saw the name Julian Croft. His blood ran cold with a toxic cocktail of shocked jealousy and pure, unadulterated rage. In his mind, Amelia was his creation. Her failure was the final stamp on his victory in their divorce. Her success, especially a success of this magnitude, was an intolerable personal insult. It suggested she was better off without him. It rewrote the narrative he had so carefully constructed. And the fact that she was tied to a man like Julian Croft, a man wealthier, more powerful, and more respected than Mark could ever hope to be, was a wound to his narcissism that he could not bear. He immediately launched a campaign of insidious sabotage. He started with whispers. He called up old mutual friends, society columnists, and gallery owners he knew. His story was always the same, delivered with a tone of feigned concern. "I'm just worried about Amelia," he'd say over a cocktail at the 21 Club. "She was always so fragile. This Julian Croft, he's known for being eccentric. I hope she's not being taken advantage of. You know her early work. It was always so derivative. I had to push her constantly. It's sad to see her passing off these old ideas as new." The whispers grew into published rumors. A blind item appeared in a gossip column. Which reclusive tech billionaire is being played by a social climbing ex-wife with a history of emotional instability? Sources say her new art is just a rehash of ideas from her more successful ex. Then Mark escalated. He found an old, disgruntled art school classmate of Amelia's, a failed artist named Peter Klein. Mark offered Peter a substantial sum of money to publicly claim that Amelia had stolen her signature style, the palette knife technique, the stormy emotional themes from his student work. Peter, bitter and broke, agreed. He gave a tearful interview to a tabloid art blog producing old sketches that bore a vague, superficial resemblance to Amelia's work. The story was a bombshell. The art world loves a scandal. The narrative shifted overnight. Was Amelia Rosewood a genius or a fraud, a survivor or a manipulator? The doubt was a poison cloud, and it began to creep into Amelia's new life. The gallery that had offered her a solo show suddenly put it on hold pending clarification. The positive press turned cautious, then skeptical. Amelia was devastated. She was thrown back into the helplessness she'd felt during the divorce. It was the same tactic Mark was trying to destroy her credibility, to isolate her and paint her as a liar. The worst part was the fear that Julian would believe it. Mark was charming and convincing. The story Peter told, while false, had just enough detail to sound plausible to an outsider. She showed Julian the article about Peter Klein, her hands shaking. "It's all lies, Julian. Mark is behind this. I know he is." Julian read the article, his expression unreadable. He was silent for a long time. The silence stretched, filled with all of Amelia's worst fears. She felt the familiar dread of being disbelieved, of having her reality denied. Finally, he put the tablet down and looked at her. His hazel eyes were clear and steady. "I know," he said simply. You know." "Amelia," he said, a faint reassuring smile on his lips. "My entire career was built on pattern recognition and data analysis. Mark Smith's patterns are pathetically transparent. I had my security team run a background check on him the first week we met. I know about the predatory legal tactics, the non-disclosure agreements he forced on former employees, the way he systematically cut you off from your support system. I also had them look into this Peter Klein. He deposited $10,000 in cash the day after that interview ran. The money trail leads back to an offshore shell corporation owned by Mark's firm." Amelia stared at him, speechless. He hadn't just believed her. He had been steps ahead of the entire situation. He had protected her without her even knowing it. "He's trying to control the narrative," Julian continued, his voice hardening slightly. "Because he's terrified of the one you're creating for yourself. He's not going to win, Amelia. Not this time." He took her hand, his grip firm and warm. "In fact, I think it's time we gave everyone a new story to talk about." Julian's plan was audacious. Daybreak America. The nation's most-watched morning show had been trying to land an interview with him for years. He had always refused. Now he accepted on one condition: they also had to feature Amelia Rosewood in a segment about her art and her incredible comeback story. The producers, ecstatic at the prospect of a live interview with the infamous recluse, agreed immediately. The segment was billed as the television event of the season. Amelia was terrified. Millions of people would be watching. Mark would be watching. But Julian was calm and reassuring. "The truth is your shield," he told her. "Just tell your story. I'll be right there." The day of the show, Amelia felt sick with nerves. She sat in the makeup chair, the bright lights feeling like an interrogation. Julian was in the green room as promised. The host, a charismatic and well-respected journalist named David Wright, was kind and put her at ease during the pre-interview. The segment began. They showed beautiful high-definition images of her paintings as David Wright narrated her story in glowing terms. Amelia, growing more confident, spoke eloquently about her passion, her struggles, and the catharsis of returning to her art. She was telling her truth, and it felt powerful. "It's an incredible story of resilience," David said, his face radiating warmth. "And we know your ex-husband, corporate raider Mark Smith, has recently faced some criticism for his perceived lack of support during your early career. We actually reached out to him for a comment, and to our surprise, he agreed to join us live to clear the air, and he says to celebrate your success." The world tilted on its axis. Amelia's blood ran cold. This was a trap, a live televised ambush. Her eyes darted off camera, searching for Julian, but he was in the green room. She was alone. The stage doors opened, and Mark Smith walked out, oozing confidence in a tailored navy suit. He smiled his predatory smile at the camera, then sat down next to Amelia, creating a suffocating proximity. The audience applauded politely. "Mark, thank you for being here. David said, a hint of surprise in his own voice. David, thank you for having me. Mark began, his voice smooth as silk. I just wanted to say publicly how incredibly proud I am of Amelia. I always believed in her talent. In fact, I funded it for years. I was her first and greatest patron. He was recasting himself as the hero of her story. Amelia sat in stunned silence, her mind racing. But Mark continued, his tone shifting to one of grave concern. As the person who knows her best, I also feel a responsibility to the truth. The art world is buzzing, and I need to be honest. The ideas, the style that everyone is praising. Amelia and I developed those concepts together years ago. I even have the old sketchbooks to prove it. He was blending the Peter Klein lie with his own, making it more potent. She's a wonderfully talented painter, but she's suggestible. She has a fragile memory. I worry she's being manipulated by her new benefactor, who is perhaps taking advantage of her past work, our past work, and packaging it as something new. It was a brilliant, poisonous performance. He was painting her as a mentally unstable plagiarist and Julian as a predator. David Wright looked taken aback, unsure how to handle the sudden ugly turn. Amelia felt the familiar panic rising, the feeling of being gaslighted and erased. But then she looked at the monitor and saw her painting, Aurelia, displayed in brilliant color. She remembered the rage and defiance that had fueled its creation. That woman wasn't fragile. She was a fighter. She took a deep breath and turned to face Mark, her voice clear and cold. Mark, she said, cutting him off, are you referring to the sketchbooks from 2015, the ones you threw in the garbage because you said, and I quote, "This messy hobby is cluttering up my new home office"? Mark was momentarily flustered. I was trying to encourage you to be tidier, to be more professional. And are you referring to the concepts we developed together? Amelia pressed on, her voice gaining strength. Like the time you told me my work was too depressing, and that I should paint happy things like sunsets or puppies that people might actually buy. Or the time you refused to let me attend the artist's residency in Italy because it clashed with your company's golf tournament in Scottsdale. The studio audience was dead silent. David Wright leaned forward, captivated. You weren't my patron, Mark, Amelia said, her eyes locking onto his. You were my cage. You didn't fund my art. You tried to suffocate it. This success I'm having now, it's not because of you. It's in spite of you. Mark's charming facade began to crack. A flash of pure fury crossed his face. He leaned in, his voice a low snarl. You were nothing before me. You were a broke art student. I gave you everything. And that $100 bill I gave you at the restaurant, you probably used it to buy groceries. You should be thanking me. It was his final fatal mistake. He had brought up the very moment of her deepest humiliation, thinking it was his trump card. You're right, Amelia said, a strange calm settling over her. You did give me $100. She looked directly into camera one, into the eyes of millions of viewers. And I want to thank you, Mark. I took that $100, the price of my humiliation, and I bought the paints and the canvas for the first painting I'd done in years. The painting that Mr. Croft discovered. The painting that started all of this. So thank you. Thank you for reminding me who I was and what I had lost. You thought you were buying my silence, but you actually bought my voice back. Before a stunned Mark Smith could respond, another figure walked onto the stage. It was Julian Croft. He had been watching from the wings, and his face was a mask of cold fury. The audience gasped. Julian walked past Mark without a glance, stood beside Amelia, and took her hand. He turned to David Wright. I'm sorry to interrupt, he said, his quiet voice commanding the entire studio, but I think some context is required. He looked at Mark, his eyes like chips of ice. Mr. Smith, my team has uncovered some interesting financial records. Records of payments to a Mr. Peter Klein. Records of offshore accounts you used to harass and silence former employees. Records that my lawyers have just this morning forwarded to the SEC and the District Attorney's Office. Your narrative, it seems, is about to fall apart. And not just about Amelia. Mark's face went completely white. He was exposed, ruined on live national television. But Julian wasn't finished. He turned away from the shell-shocked Mark and faced Amelia. His expression softened, all the coldness melting away, replaced by an overwhelming look of love and admiration. "Amelia Rosewood," he said, his voice now filled with emotion. "I have spent my life surrounded by masterpieces. But none are as strong, as beautiful, or as resilient as you. You are a work of art, and your soul is a masterpiece." And then, in front of 10 million stunned viewers, the reclusive billionaire Julian Croft got down on one knee. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, opening it to reveal a simple, elegant ring with a single flawless sapphire the color of a twilight sky. "You taught me how to see the world in color again," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Amelia, will you marry me?" The studio erupted. Amelia stared down at Julian, her mind a kaleidoscope of shock, joy, and disbelief. Tears, real tears of happiness this time, streamed down her face. In the background, she was vaguely aware of Mark Smith being escorted off the set by security, his face a grotesque mask of defeat. The camera zoomed in on her face, capturing the moment for the entire world to see. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, of course, yes." Julian slid the ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. He stood up and they embraced as the studio audience rose to their feet in a thunderous standing ovation. The image of their kiss, with the title of her painting Aurelia still on the screen behind them, became an iconic moment in television history. The aftermath was a whirlwind. Mark Smith's downfall was swift and total. The SEC investigation, spurred by Julian's evidence, uncovered years of financial fraud. He was publicly disgraced, fired from his own company, and eventually faced a slew of indictments. Tiffany, his fiancée, left him the moment the scandal broke, her loyalty as shallow as her affections. He lost everything, becoming a parody of the powerful man he once was, a footnote in Amelia's much more interesting story. Amelia, on the other hand, became a phenomenon. The live TV proposal turned her from an art world curiosity into a household name. Her story of love, betrayal, and vindication resonated with millions. Her solo show, which the gallery was now begging to host, sold out before it even opened. Museums clamored to acquire her work. The prices for her paintings skyrocketed, but it was never about the money for her. It was about the validation. It was about her voice finally being heard. She and Julian opted for a small private wedding held in the gallery warehouse, surrounded by the art they both loved, and a handful of true friends, including a tearful Sarah as her maid of honor. Their life together wasn't a fairy tale of mansions and yachts. It was a partnership of equals. He respected her work and her independence, and she grounded him, pulling the reclusive billionaire back into the world. They built a foundation together, the Croft Rosewood Foundation for the Arts, dedicated to supporting struggling artists who, like Amelia, had talent but lacked opportunity. One afternoon, a few years later, Amelia was in her new studio, a magnificent, light-filled space Julian had built for her, working on a new series. It was brighter, more hopeful than her earlier work, filled with bold strokes of gold and crimson. Her sapphire engagement ring glinted in the light as she moved her brush across the canvas. Julian came in and wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder as they both looked at the painting. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. She leaned back against him, a contented smile on her face. She thought about the waitress in the worn-out shoes, the humiliated ex-wife standing in the shadow of a cruel man. She thought about the $100 bill and the desperate, defiant act of buying paint. It all felt like a different lifetime, a story about someone else. "I'm thinking," she said, dabbing a streak of pure white onto the canvas like a light breaking through the clouds, "that sometimes the most beautiful things can grow from the most painful beginnings, and that the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's just a life well lived." And as she added the final brushstroke, she knew with a certainty that filled her entire being that her life was her greatest masterpiece. The wedding was a dream, and the first year of their marriage was a blissful continuation of it. Amelia's artistic career ascended to stratospheric heights. Her solo show titled Vindication was a critical and commercial triumph. Museums acquired her pieces, and a prestigious publishing house produced a stunning coffee table book of her work. She and Julian were a celebrated couple, admired not just for their love story, but for their shared philanthropic vision. They were by all accounts living a perfect life. But perfection, Amelia was learning, could have its own unique pressures. The cracks began to show not as gaping fissures, but as hairline fractures in the beautiful facade of her new reality. It started with a magazine profile. Vanity Fair wanted to do a major feature on her. Amelia was thrilled. It was the pinnacle of mainstream recognition. She spent days with the journalist opening up about her process, her inspirations, and her past struggles. But when the article was published, her heart sank. The cover line splashed across a glamorous photo of her and Julian read, "The Billionaire's Muse, How Amelia Croft Painted Her Way from Rags to Riches." Inside the article was respectful, but the narrative was subtly skewed. Her art was framed almost entirely through the lens of her relationship with Julian. Her triumph was not presented as her own, but as the second act of a love story. Her name, the one she had fought so hard to reclaim, was Amelia Croft throughout the piece. Rosewood was mentioned only as a historical footnote, the name of the woman before the fairy tale began. Julian, seeing her disappointment, was immediately protective. "It's journalistic garbage, darling," he said, tossing the magazine onto the table. "They're selling a narrative, not reporting a fact. Everyone who matters knows your talent stands on its own." She knew he was right, but the feeling of being erased, a feeling she thought she had vanquished, began to creep back in. It was a faint, familiar chill. She started noticing it everywhere. At charity galas, she'd be introduced as Julian Croft's wife, the artist, the emphasis always on the former. Questions from interviewers began to stray from her artistic technique and focus on her personal life. "What's it like being married to one of the most powerful men in the world? Does he influence your work?" Her new studio, once a sanctuary, began to feel like a gilded cage. It was a magnificent space with 20-foot ceilings and a perfect, unwavering northern light, but she found herself pacing its polished floors, unable to paint. The blank canvases seemed to mock her. The pressure was immense. Every brushstroke now felt weighed down by the expectation of greatness, by the silent, insidious question, was she a true genius, or was she just lucky? Was she an artist, or was she an accessory? The anxiety culminated at a major contemporary art auction at Sotheby's. One of her earlier post-divorce pieces, not from Julian's collection, was up for sale. It was a smaller, deeply personal work titled $100 Bill, a chaotic, abstract swirl of grays and blacks with a single defiant slash of ultramarine blue. Julian had wanted to buy it back for her, but she insisted it go to a true collector. It was a chance for her work to be valued on its own merits. The bidding was fierce. The price climbed rapidly past $100,000, past $500,000, until it reached a staggering $1.2 million. The crack of the auctioneer's gavel echoed through the silent, opulent room. Amelia should have felt ecstatic. It was a world record for an artist at her career stage, but her ears were ringing from a comment she had overheard moments before, whispered between two well-dressed women behind her. $1.2 million, one had sniffed. It's hardly a surprise. Her husband could buy the entire auction with his pocket change. Having the Croft name attached is better than a good review from the Times. The words struck her with the force of a physical blow. They invalidated everything. Her struggle, her defiance, her talent, all of it dismissed as the simple byproduct of a powerful man's influence. It was Mark's narrative all over again, just wrapped in a more sophisticated, expensive package. She wasn't Amelia Rosewood, the artist who had survived. She was Amelia Croft, a brand. She felt a wave of nausea and claustrophobia. Excusing herself, she slipped out of the auction house into the cold night air. The flashes of paparazzi cameras felt like assaults. She waved off the waiting driver and just started walking, her sequined gown trailing on the gritty Manhattan sidewalk. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she needed to breathe air that wasn't thick with the scent of money and expectation. Her feet, acting on some primal memory, carried her downtown to the street where her old apartment building stood. She stood across from it, staring up at the window of what used to be her living room, her studio. The lights were on. Someone else lived there now. She remembered the smell of the laundromat, the taste of cheap tea, the ache in her bones after a long shift. She remembered the fierce, desperate hope she'd felt painting Aurelia in that cramped space. She had nothing then, but she had been entirely unequivocally herself. Her identity hadn't been tied to anyone. Her victories, however small, were hers alone. "I had a feeling I might find you here." Julian's voice was soft beside her. He had shed his tuxedo jacket and was holding it out for her. She let him drape it over her shivering shoulders. "How did you know?" she whispered. "It's your origin story," he said simply, his eyes full of understanding. "It's where you forged your armor." He looked up at the window. "Are you okay? You left so suddenly." The tears she had been holding back finally fell. "No," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm not okay. I heard what they were saying in there, Julian. They think my success is because of you. That my name is just an extension of yours. That painting sold for $1 million and it felt like nothing. It felt like a transaction between rich people and I wasn't even part of the equation. Am I Amelia Rosewood anymore? Or did she disappear the moment I said I do and became Amelia Croft?" He listened, his expression pained, not because he was offended, but because he saw the depth of her hurt. When she finished, he didn't offer solutions. He didn't dismiss her fears. He just held her gaze, his own reflecting the city lights. "When I fell in love with you," he said, his voice low and earnest, "I fell in love with Amelia Rosewood, the artist, the fighter, the woman who stared into the abyss and painted her way out. I didn't marry you to change your name. I married you to share mine. But if my name is casting a shadow on your light, then we need to fix it. Because your light is the most brilliant thing in my life, and I won't let anything, especially my own legacy, diminish it." He took her hand. "So you tell me, what do you need?" The simple question was everything. He wasn't telling her what to do. He was asking. He was seeing her. And in that moment, the fog in her mind cleared. She knew what she needed to do. "From now on," she said, her voice gaining a new hard-won strength, "professionally, in every gallery, at every auction, on every publication, the artist is Amelia Rosewood, not Amelia Croft. Just Rosewood. I love being your wife, but my work has to be my own. My name has to be my own." A slow, proud smile spread across Julian's face. "I think that's an excellent idea," he said. "Let's go home, Amelia Rosewood." As they walked away from the old building, Amelia felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. She realized her fairy tale ending wasn't about the billionaire or the fame. The happy ending was the ongoing, ever-vigilant act of claiming her own identity, of ensuring that no matter whose wife she was, she would always, first and foremost, be the artist who had turned her own pain into something beautiful. She had fought for her name once, and she would keep fighting for it, because it was the one masterpiece that was truly entirely hers. Amelia Rosewood's incredible journey is a powerful reminder that our lowest moments do not have to define our endings. She was mocked, dismissed, and left with nothing but the echoes of a life that was stolen from her. But instead of letting that humiliation break her, she used it as fuel. She transformed her pain into power, her despair into art. And in doing so, she didn't just reclaim her life, she built a new one, more beautiful and authentic than she could have ever imagined. Her story proves that your true worth is never determined by someone else's opinion, and that sometimes the greatest love finds you, not when you are perfect, but when you are brave enough to be perfectly resiliently yourself. If Amelia's story of resilience and ultimate vindication inspired you, please show your support by hitting that like button and share this video with someone who might need a reminder that their comeback is coming. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable stories that prove truth is often more dramatic than fiction. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What was the most satisfying moment of Amelia's triumph for you?